If you were to ask me what I wanted most on Guadalcanal in 1942, my answer wouldn't be a hot steak nor a pinup of a Hollywood starlet. It would be 5 minutes, just 5 damn minutes, of quiet sleep. I'm Thomas Vance. Back then, I was a lieutenant in the Cactus Air Force, flying F-4F Wildcats. By day, we were hunters, chasing Zeros and Betty bombers across the sky. But the moment the sun sank beneath the blood-red horizon of Iron Bottom Sound, we instantly devolved into frightened rabbits. The Japanese may have lost dominion over the sky by day, but in the autumn of 1942, the night still belonged to them. Every night, just past midnight, the sound would arrive right on schedule. It was the drone of 2 Mitsubishi Corsairs engines, but it sounded all wrong. Whoom, ang, whoom, ang. It was the distinct, oscillating tremor caused by unsynchronized engines, sounding exactly like an old washing machine about to rattle itself apart. Washing Machine Charlie had arrived. My crew chief, Wrench Old Joe, and I would huddle in a foxhole by the Henderson Field runway, a pit filled with the stench of mold and standing water. Joe would be shoving a Lucky Strike into his mouth with the fastest hands I'd ever seen, shaking as if he were playing a piano concerto. "What's that bastard dropping tonight?" Joe would curse under his breath. "If it's a flare, fine. But if it's those damn 250-kilo bombs..." Before he could finish, a shriek tore through the darkness overhead, followed immediately by a dull thud and an explosion. The earth shuddered and dirt rained down on my helmet, not too close, maybe 200 yards away near the fuel dump. Charlie wasn't always there to kill. More often, he was there to torture. That lone Japanese plane would circle overhead, round and round. He knew we couldn't see him. He knew our anti-aircraft guns were just firing blindly into the void, tracers scratching futile lines of fire across the night sky, never even grazing his shadow. That helplessness was more maddening than the fear of death. Once, when the siren wailed, I actually tried to climb into my Wildcat's cockpit. I wanted to take off. I wanted to charge into that ink-black void and tear that bastard down. But my squadron leader pinned me by the shoulder. His eyes were webbed with red veins, the mark of chronic sleep deprivation. "Don't be a fool, Tom," he rasped. "At that altitude, in that darkness, taking off is suicide. You don't even know who he is, let alone where to find him. Your eyes are blind at night." He was right. In that hellscape of 1942, the concept of a night fighter didn't exist for us. We were blind. The Japanese had pilots rigorously trained for night vision. They could see our wakes by starlight. We could only crouch like lambs awaiting the slaughter, praying the bomb wouldn't land in our foxhole. That night, Charlie circled for 3 solid hours. 3 hours. Dropping a bomb or a flare every 20 minutes, stretching our nerves until they snapped. 10,000 Marines and pilots at Henderson Field lay there with eyes wide open, listening to that accursed whum. Whum, until dawn. When the morning sun rose, I looked at the craters along the runway and the Marines being carried away on stretchers. I made a vow. If the day ever came when I could see in the dark, I would tear those Japanese bastards out of the sky, piece by piece. In November 1942, riddled with severe malaria and combat fatigue, I was rotated back to the States. Sitting in the transport plane, watching Guadalcanal vanish beneath the clouds, I felt no relief, only a deep, burning shame. I had fled the darkness, but I hadn't defeated it. The months back in the U.S. were pure torture. I was stationed in San Diego as a routine flight instructor, teaching greenhorns how to perform a split S. My body was recovering, but my heart remained in the black nights of the Solomon Islands. Then, one day in February 1943, a set of orders changed everything. Quonset Point Naval Air Station? I stared at the paper, brow furrowed. That was in Rhode Island, hardly a staging ground for frontline units. The orders said I was to report to a program codenamed Project Affirm. There was no further explanation. No specific squadron number, no mission description, just the words, Top Secret, stamped in red. When I arrived at that cold, wind-swept New England base, I immediately realized something was different. Parked along the runway weren't standard trainers, but a row of odd-looking aircraft. I walked into the briefing room to find a dozen other pilots already seated. Every face wore the same look of confusion and defiance, the standard expression of a fighter pilot who's been chosen for something he doesn't understand. The door opened. In walked a naval lieutenant commander, short in stature but built like wire rope, with eyes sharp as scalpels. I knew him, or rather, I knew his reputation. William J. Gus Widhelm, hero of the Battle of Santa Cruz and a notorious troublemaker. Gentlemen, Gus didn't waste time on pleasantries, tossing a stack of files onto the table. I know you're wondering why you've been dragged to this freezing, God-forsaken place. Some say you're aces, some say you're crazy, but the way I see it, right now, you're just a bunch of blind men. He turned to the chalkboard and wrote one word, radar. Over in Britain, the RAF is already using this stuff to knock the Germans out of the sky at night. But in the Pacific, our fleet is as helpless at night as a girl caught without her pants. Gus turned back, staring us down. The Navy has decided to change that. We are forming the first carrier-based fighter squadron capable of launching, searching, and destroying enemy aircraft in total darkness. This is VFN 75. It sounded like science fiction. Single-seat fighters, at night, relying on a radio box. Don't think this is going to be a cakewalk, another voice chimed in from the corner. It was Lieutenant Commander Richard Chick Harmer, the technical brain of the base. We're going to turn you into bats. You have to forget your eyes, which you're so proud of, and learn to see the world through this. He held up a cathode ray tube display, no bigger than 3 inches wide. On it, a single green dot pulsed. This is your new eye, Harmer said. If you don't want to learn, or if you think it's impossible, the door is over there. Go back to your regular squadrons and keep shivering in your foxholes. No one moved. We all remembered the shivering. Good, Gus grinned, a smile touched with madness. Welcome to the Batmen Club. From today on, you are the masters of the night, assuming, of course, you survive the training. Our steed was a monster, the Vought F4U Corsair, but not the ordinary Corsair. This was the F4U2. When I first saw the plane, I was stunned. The standard F4U was hard enough to fly. That long nose blocked all forward visibility, and the massive propeller torque was enough to flip a rookie into the sea on takeoff. The Navy actually deemed it too dangerous for carriers and restricted it to the Marines on land. And the F4U2, converted for night fighting, was a monster among monsters. To fit the bulky AIA radar, engineers had ripped out one of the .50 caliber machine guns on the right wing and replaced it with a massive, bulbous white radome. This completely wrecked the aerodynamic balance. Even in level flight, you had to fight the stick constantly to keep the right wing from dropping. The cockpit was worse. To prevent instrument lights from reflecting and giving away our position or ruining our night vision, the exhaust stacks were fitted with flame dampeners, which robbed the engine of horsepower. But inside the cockpit, it was a nightmare. That 3-inch radar scope was jammed right into the center of the instrument panel. How do I use this thing? I asked the radar instructor in the back seat during my first simulation. Though it was a single-seat plane, we had guidance during ground sims. Watch the green smear, Vance. The instructor's voice crackled in my headset. That's grass, clutter. When a blip appears that's brighter and steadier than the clutter, that's your target. The distance of the dot is range. Left or right is azimuth. You need to stare at that damn green bug while flying a 400-mile-an-hour airplane, all while maintaining altitude without seeing the ocean. It was an inhumane design. For the first month, we pushed our physiological limits every day. We wore special red goggles to adapt our night vision, then practiced blind flying in completely enclosed cockpits. The hardest part wasn't finding the target. It was trusting the instruments. As a fighter pilot, your instinct is to trust your eyes and your inner ear. But in the dark, your senses lie. When you're circling over a pitch-black ocean with no horizon and no stars, if you don't glue your eyes to the attitude indicator, you'll swear you're flying level when you're actually diving head-first into the sea. I nearly died during one night training session. Rhode Island was foggy that night, and I was practicing a radar intercept. I had locked onto the SNJ trainer, serving as the target drone on my scope. "Contact! Range 1 mile, bearing starboard 5 degrees, I shouted into the mic. The green dot danced. I focused on correcting my heading, boxing the dot in the crosshairs. My entire attention was sucked into that tiny screen, and I completely forgot to check my altimeter. Suddenly, the tower screamed in my ear, "Ghost! Pull up, watch your altitude!" I snapped a glance at the altimeter, 200 feet. The black ocean was right beneath my feet, like a gaping maw. Instinct took over. I yanked the stick back, and the massive F4U engine roared as the belly of the plane practically skimmed the wavetops. When I got back to base, I was soaked in cold sweat. Gus Widhelm was standing on the tarmac smoking. He looked at my pale face and said just one thing. "If you pull that stunt in Guadalcanal, the Japs won't even have to shoot. You'll just turn into a submarine. It's not just technique, Vance. It's faith. You have to believe in that green dot more than you believe in God." From that day on, I forced myself to find a soul in that eerie green screen. I began to understand the language of the blips. I learned which jitter was a wave echo and which crisp spike was an enemy plane. We, the pioneers of VFN 75, began to evolve in the darkness. We were no longer eagles hunting by sight. We were becoming bats, hunting by echolocation. In the summer of 1943, VFN 75 was officially commissioned. We had 18 pilots and 6 precious F4U-2S. We were the first organized night fighter squadron in U.S. Navy history. Although our goal was carrier operations, the fleet was still terrified of recovering these high-speed fighters at night. So our first deployment was land-based. We were going back to the Solomons, to Munda Airfield on New Georgia, the very edge of the front line. The night before we left, we had one last drink at the Quonset Point Officers Club. "To sleepless nights," Major Harmer toasted. "To giving that bastard Charlie a sleepless night," I added. Gus laughed loudly, slapping my back. "Boys, this isn't just revenge. We're changing the rules of war. It used to be that sunset was the signal for a truce. From now on, when the sun goes down, the killing is just getting started. We were taking this damn radar and these damn heavy F4U-2S halfway across the world, back to that jungle filled with malaria, mud, and nightmares. But I wasn't afraid. As I ran my hand over the white radome on the wing, I felt a power I'd never known before. I knew that this time, when I heard the unsynchronized thrum of that washing machine in the night sky, I wouldn't be shivering in a foxhole. I would open my eye. I would see him. I would slide in behind him silently, like the Grim Reaper. The Japanese didn't know what was coming. They thought the night was still their friend. They were wrong. We were the night. In September 1943, we landed our precious, freakish F4U-2 Corsairs at Munda Airfield on New Georgia. If hell has an entrance, it's Munda. The Americans had only recently captured it, and the air was thick with the sickly sweet stench of rotting corpses and lingering cordite. The runway? Calling it a runway was an insult. It was a white scar of crushed coral mixed with rain-soaked volcanic mud, lined with the bulldozed wreckage of Japanese Zeros and shattered coconut trunks. As we taxied to the revetment, a group of Marine pilots gathered around. They looked like savages, bearded, hollow-eyed, their flight suits stained beyond recognition. "Hey, look at that!" a lieutenant shouted, pointing at the protruding radar pod on my right wing. "Did that plane grow a tumor?" Laughter erupted. On the Pacific front back then, nobody had seen such a thing. "That's our eye, son." I climbed down from the wing, taking off my helmet, trying to look like a hardened veteran despite my stomach churning from the landing. "We're VFN 75. We're here for the night shift." "Night shift?" The Marine spat on the ground. "Good luck. At night, this sky belongs to Charlie. You boys better find a deep foxhole like the rest of us." The disdain in their eyes was obvious. To them, we were just another bunch of Washington rich kids sent to die with fancy new toys. The F-4U already had a bad reputation on carriers. Now, with a drag-inducing radar pod flying at night, it looked like a double suicide pact. Our commander, Gus Widhelm, ignored the jeers. He surveyed the surroundings coldly, then ordered the crew chief, "Hide the planes, check the tubes. It might rain tonight. If a single drop of water gets into that damn radar, I'll stuff you inside the radome myself." That night, as predicted, Washing Machine Charlie kept his appointment. It was that familiar sound, the tooth-grinding asynchronous drone of two Mitsubishi engines. The airfield's AA guns began firing wildly, tracers weaving a futile net beneath the clouds. Bombs fell. Though they missed the runway, that old anger of being toyed with surged in my chest. I watched Major Harmer in the tent. He was tuning an oscilloscope, the green glow reflecting on his face like a wizard. "Hear that, chick?" I asked. "I hear it." He didn't look up. "Patience, Ghost. Let them have one more night of glory. Once we calibrate these babies, we go harvesting souls." Combat proved far more brutal than training in Rhode Island. In the first week, we scored no kills and nearly lost 2 pilots. The problem wasn't flying skill. It was the technological limitations of the era. The AIA radar was incredibly delicate. Munda's heat and humidity were kryptonite to electronics. Often, everything tested fine on the ground, but once airborne, the scope would dissolve into snowy clutter or dead silence. Furthermore, we had to rely on ground control. There were no sophisticated combat information centers, CIC, yet. We were guided by a ground radar station codenamed Moonlight. On the night of September 23, 1943, it was my turn. Moonlight to Ghost, Vector 330, range 15 miles, Angels 8. That's your bogey. The ground controller's voice was tense. Ghost copies, vectoring 3-3-0. I pushed the throttle, and the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine roared. My F-4U-2 bored into the clouds like a black shark. It was pitch black. No stars, no moon, only the faint red glow of the instrument panel and that dancing green dot in the center. It was a profound loneliness. In this world, there was only you, this machine, and a man a few miles away whom you wanted to kill. "Contact!" I shouted. A clear spike appeared on my radar screen. "Bandit!" My heart rate instantly spiked to 150. Range, 3 miles. "Steady, Tom, steady," I told myself. I began adjusting my heading, trying to box the green dot into the center line. The distance was closing. 2 miles, 1 mile, but I made a mistake. I was too eager. My closure rate was too high. Suddenly, a flash of blue fire flickered in a black cloud ahead, exhaust from a Japanese bomber. Before I could squeeze the trigger, a massive shadow whooshed over my head, missing by feet. The powerful wake turbulence instantly flipped my plane 90 degrees. Damn it! I fought to level the plane, but the heavy right wing made the F-4U-2 sluggish. By the time I regained control, the radar screen was a mess. Target lost. It was a Betty bomber. The bastard had slipped right under my nose. Back on the ground, I threw my helmet into the dirt in rage. Gus walked over and handed me a cigarette. "You saw him, right?" he asked. "I saw him, but I blew it. I came in too hot." "You saw him," Gus repeated, his eyes steely. "That's enough. Before, we couldn't even touch their shadows. Now we can find them in that ink. Tom, we've already won half the battle. Next time, just slow down. Slow down." He was right. We hadn't scored a kill, but we proved it. We could find them. The turning point came on a late night in October 1943. The weather was unusually good. High clouds, sparse starlight. Ground radar caught Charlie again. This time, we sent up 2 planes, myself and Lieutenant O'Hara. Moonlight guided us to the waters north of Munda. Ghost, target is dead ahead, range 4 miles, speed 160 knots. I stared at the radar screen. The green insect appeared again. This time, it was as steady as a rock. I had learned my lesson. I adjusted my flaps, lowered my speed, and slid silently into the enemy's low 6 o'clock position, the standard blind spot for radar interception, and the perfect kill zone. Range 2,000 yards, range 1,000 yards, range 500 yards. My eyes bored into the void ahead. We didn't just rely on radar. The final shot had to be visual. That was the Navy's iron rule. No friendly fire. Suddenly, I saw it. In the nothingness, 2 rows of faint blue flames were dancing, the exhaust of Mitsubishi Corsairs engines. As the distance closed, a massive silhouette emerged, a G-4M Betty bomber, its bloated fuselage gleaming with a faint metallic sheen under the starlight. It had absolutely no idea that death was riding on its back. Was the tail gunner asleep? Or could he simply not conceive that an American fighter could find him in such darkness? I flipped off the safety. My finger rested lightly on the red trigger. "Gotcha," I whispered. At less than 100 yards, I squeezed the trigger. The F-4U-2's remaining 5.50 caliber machine guns roared in unison. In the silent night sky, the muzzle flash was blinding, robbing my sight for half a second. But I didn't need to see. The tracers, like whips of fire, drilled precisely into the root of the Betty's right wing, straight into the fuel tanks. In an instant, the night was torn apart. A massive orange fireball blossomed in front of my windscreen. It was terrifying and magnificent. I yanked the stick, banking hard left to avoid the debris. When I looked back, the massive bomber had become a falling torch, tumbling through the sky and illuminating the waves below. Seconds later, a pillar of fire and water erupted from the sea surface. The radio was silent. Then O'Hara's voice broke through, trembling with ecstasy. "Jesus, Tom, you blew him apart like a damn firework." I took a deep breath of oxygen, keyed the mic, and kept my voice steady. "Moonlight, this is Ghost. Target scratched. Repeat, target scratched. Charlie is going for a swim tonight." When we landed, the entire Munda airfield was in an uproar. Ground crews, Marine infantry, even the cooks ran to the runway. They looked at my soot-stained plane as if it were a holy relic. The Marine pilot who had mocked me pushed through the crowd and handed me a warm beer. "Sorry, sir." He looked at me with awe. "I take back what I said. You guys aren't blind. You're the goddamn Batmen." That night, Munda Airfield slept soundly for the first time. No droning, no bombs. Because the Japanese saw that fireball too. They knew the dark wasn't safe anymore. In the weeks that followed, VFN 75 went on a rampage. We refined our tactics. We learned to use cloud cover, how to work relay guidance with ground radar. Our kill count began to climb. 1, 2, 5. The Japanese panicked. They dared not circle arrogantly over the airfield anymore. They changed routes, lowered altitudes, trying to hide from our invisible eyes. But no matter how they hid, if they had to fly, our radar could sniff them out. However, for Gus and me, this was just the beginning. In late 1943, orders from Admiral Nimitz's headquarters in Pearl Harbor reached the squadron. "Pack your bags, gentlemen," Gus waved the telegram, that trademark wild grin on his face. "Playtime on land is over. The Navy finally acknowledges us." "Where are we going?" Harmer asked. "We're going where the Navy belongs." Gus pointed toward the ocean. "We're going to the carriers. We're taking night combat to the flat tops. If you thought landing at Munda was hard, wait until you try landing on a pitching postage stamp in the middle of a pitch-black ocean." VFN 75 was about to make history. We would be the first night fighter squadron to deploy on a carrier. And at this moment, a storm unlike any other was brewing in the Pacific. We were about to take this power, this reaper in the dark, to the Gilbert Islands, to the Marshalls, straight into the heart of the Japanese Empire's defense lines. I looked at the F-4U-2 sitting in the mud, its radar dome glistening in the sunset. "Rested up, old girl?" I patted the fuselage. "Next stop, we're going to raise some hell." In early 1944, when we saw the new planes at Pearl Harbor, I actually felt a twinge of disappointment. It was the F-6F-3N Hellcat. Compared to the F-4U Corsair I had flown, with its sleek lines and wild, aggressive beauty, the Hellcat looked like a beer barrel with wings. It was boxy, squat, and built like a dockworker, lacking the Corsair's elegant gull wings entirely. "This is what we're trading for?" O'Hara kicked the heavy landing gear. "Looks like a flying anvil." "Don't judge a book by its cover, gentlemen." Major Harmer walked over, still holding those awe-inspiring technical manuals. "You're going to fall in love with her. The F-4U is a wild horse. It wants to kill you. The F-6F is a loyal dog. It wants to save you, especially at night." The most critical change hung on the outer starboard wing, a white, spindle-shaped radar pod. Inside wasn't the finicky AIA radar from Munda, but the brand new AN/APS-6. "This is real magic," Harmer pointed at the pod. "Centimetric wave technology. It lets you see a seagull 5 miles out in pitch darkness. And the scope isn't just that blinding green dot anymore. It scans terrain, measures distance, and even lets you see the shape of the coastline." When I first strapped myself into the Hellcat's spacious cockpit, I immediately understood what Harmer meant. There was none of the Corsairs' suffocating claustrophobia. The visibility was excellent, though useless at night, and the instrument layout was logical. When I took to the sky, the feeling was even stronger. It was incredibly stable, like sitting on your living room sofa. For a night fighter pilot, stability is life. You didn't have to fight the stick constantly. You could devote more energy to that brand new radar screen. The test that night remains etched in my memory. I flew over the coastline of Oahu and switched on the APS-6. The screen wasn't a mess of noise. A crisp outline of the coast swept into view. I could see the ships in Pearl Harbor arranged like distinct glowing pebbles in the bay. "God," I muttered, "this is practically cheating." If we were blind swordsmen flailing in the dark at Munda, now we were snipers with night vision goggles. The Japanese had no idea what they were about to face. Having the plane was just step one. The real test was the project known as the Pilot's Graveyard, night carrier landings. Although there had been sporadic tests in late 1943, having an entire squadron perform routine night operations in combat was a first in naval history. We were deploying to the famous CV-6, the USS Enterprise, the Big E. Imagine this. On an ocean so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face, you have to find a deck only a few hundred feet long, moving at 20 knots, pitching up and down. You can't use lights because that makes the ship a target for submarines. Your only reliance is the LSO, landing signal officer, holding two faintly glowing wands, and your absolute trust in yourself and your machine. My first night landing practice was on a moonless night. I circled at 1,000 feet, the tower guiding me in. Ghost 3, Vector 180, ship is 3 miles, prepare for approach. I couldn't see the water. I couldn't see the carrier. I only saw the massive blip on the radar directly ahead, the Enterprise. I dropped flaps, gear down. The Hellcats shuddered, speed dropping to 90 knots. I began my descent. Do you have the meatball? The optical landing aid, though at night we relied heavily on the LSO's signals. Negative, I can't see a damn thing. My heart was racing, palms slick with sweat. In daylight, this was an easy approach. At night, the fear of the unknown is magnified infinitely. Your brain tells you you're banking. You get spatial disorientation. You feel like the ocean is the sky. Just as I was about to crack, 2 faint yellow dots appeared in the darkness. The LSO's wands. You're high! High! The LSO's voice roared over the radio. I shoved the stick forward, dropping the nose. The 2 dots aligned into a horizontal line, the signal for perfect. Cut! Cut! I chopped the throttle at the last second. The Hellcat slammed onto the deck. The tail hook caught the wire, and massive inertia slammed me against my harness. As the deck crew guided me out of the landing area, I found my legs were shaking so violently I couldn't keep them on the rudder pedals. Gus was waiting in the ready room with a pot of hot coffee. "Welcome to the Hell Club," he grinned. "Hit the deck pretty hard there, Vance. But if you walk away from it, it's a perfect landing." We spent a solid month practicing this ballet of death. We learned to fly by instruments alone, ignoring the window, trusting those 2 faint dots of the LSO more than our own inner ears. When VFN-101, the expanded unit formed from our original core, officially deployed on the Enterprise, we were the sharpest bunch of lunatics in the Pacific Fleet. February 1944, Operation Hailstone. Target, Truk Lagoon, the Japanese Navy's Gibraltar of the Pacific. That was our first major carrier action. Truk was a massive lagoon filled with countless Japanese transports and warships. By day, our Helldivers and Avengers turned it into an inferno. But the true slaughter began at night. The Japanese assumed the bombing would stop when the sun went down. They were wrong. Late on the night of February 16th, my wingman and I catapulted off the Enterprise. This time, we weren't carrying air-to-air loads. We were carrying 500-pound bombs. The APS-6 radar showed its godlike power again. The shape of Truk Lagoon was clear on my screen. It was like flying over a map. "That's our target," O'Hara guided over the radio. 11 o'clock, those 2 big returns. Those are anchored tankers. Without any visual reference on the ground, we aimed entirely by radar. I adjusted my course, steadying the blip in the crosshairs, and began my dive. The anti-aircraft fire came up, but the Japanese couldn't see us. They were firing blindly into the sky. Red and green tracers danced around me like a grand fireworks show, but didn't scratch us. I pressed the release button. Seconds later, 2 blinding flashes erupted in the darkness below. Even at 3,000 feet, I felt the shockwave. Bullseye! That night, we ravaged the skies over Truk. We didn't just sink ships. We hunted down the Japanese night fighters trying to intercept us. On the return flight, my radar picked up a fast-moving target. Unknown, range 2 miles, you're 6 o'clock. I yanked the nose up into an Immelmann turn, instantly gaining the altitude advantage. The APS-6 locked onto him tight. It was a Moonlight, J1N1 Gecko, the Japanese Navy's dedicated night fighter, developed specifically to counter us. But their technology was archaic. They still relied on naked eyes and searchlights. I slid silently into his low 6, the golden position. I could even see the silhouette of the Japanese pilot's helmet. He was looking left and right, completely unaware that the Reaper was 500 yards behind him. I pulled the trigger. 6.50 caliber guns spat tongues of fire, shredding the moonlight into confetti. He didn't even have time to make a single evasive maneuver. This was the night sky of 1944. We were no longer evenly matched opponents. This was a unilateral slaughter. Fast forward to June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Everyone knows the daytime battle, where our Hellcats swatted hundreds of Japanese planes out of the sky like clay pigeons. But behind that glorious victory, our night fighter squadron was silently guarding the fleet's flanks. Beaten to a pulp by day, the Japanese tried a desperate gamble, launching torpedo attacks at night. They sent elite Tenzan, Jill torpedo bombers, trying to use the darkness to approach our carrier task force at low altitude. A year ago, this tactic might have worked, but in June 1944, it was suicide. That night, I was leading a 4-plane division on patrol outside the fleet perimeter. Ghost, Vector 270, Low Angels, range 20 miles, big swarm of flies approaching. The carrier's CIC, Combat Information Center, briefed us. Copy, dinner is served. We pushed our noses down, diving toward the ocean. A row of distinct blips appeared on the APS-6 screen. They were flying low, under 200 feet, trying to evade shipboard radar, but they couldn't hide from airborne radar. Sort targets. I'll take lead. O'Hara, you take left. We cut into their formation like ghosts. The Japanese were still focused on finding our fleet, completely unaware that wolves were already among the sheep. The next 5 minutes were a one-sided massacre. I locked onto a Jill, range 300 yards, fire. It instantly turned into a fireball and plunged into the sea. Then the second, then the third. The Japanese pilots panicked. They broke radio silence, screaming over the channels. They couldn't see where the attacks were coming from. Tracers flew from every direction, every shot lethal. That night, our squadron shot down 14 enemy planes. We didn't suffer a scratch. When we landed back on the Enterprise, the ship was buzzing. Task Force 58, Commander Admiral Mitcher sent a personal message. Well done, Dark Knights. You snuffed out the Japs' last hope. I sat in the ready room, peeling off gloves, soaked in sweat. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of adrenaline. Major Harmer walked in and updated our scoreboard on the chalkboard. The numbers were staggering. From January to June 1944, our squadron achieved 56 aerial victories, losing only 2 aircraft, and those were mechanical failures. That is an astounding 28-to-1 kill ratio. Look at this, Harmer pointed at the number. This isn't just victory. This is dominance. No air force on this planet can stop us at this time, in this environment. I looked out the window at the pitch-black sky. It used to be the place I feared most, the domain of Washing Machine Charlie, a strictly defined abyss of death. Now, it was our backyard. Whether it was the ugly shape of the Hellcat or the eerie green glow of the APS-6, they had forged a fact. The U.S. Navy had conquered the night, but the war wasn't over. As the front moved toward the Japanese home islands, we were about to encounter a crazier enemy, the kamikaze, and the mission of the night fighter was about to face its ultimate, most grueling test. By late 1944, the flavor of the war had changed. If Guadalcanal was a chess match against a cunning hunter, and the Marianas was a technological slaughter, then the Philippines and Okinawa were battles against lunatics. The Japanese were no longer trying to come home alive. Kamikaze. When we first heard the word, no one believed it. Who would use a plane as a missile? But that night in Lady Gulf, when I saw with my own eyes a burning fireball, not trying to ditch but driving straight into our escort carrier like a furious meteor, I knew that logic had left the world. For a night fighter pilot, the kamikaze was the ultimate nightmare. Before, when we intercepted an enemy, they would evade, fight back, try to run. That survival instinct made their flight paths predictable. But the kamikaze was different. On the radar screen, they were just stiff, zombie-like blips. They ignored you on their tail, ignored your tracers. Even when set ablaze, they would drag their broken carcasses toward anything on the sea that glowed. April 1945, the Battle of Okinawa, the highest level of hell. Our home, CV-6 Enterprise, had officially become the Navy's first night carrier, designated CVN-6. This meant we flipped day and night. The regular daytime air group was removed, replaced entirely by radar-equipped F-6F-5N Hellcats and TBM-3D Avengers. We became vampires. We slept during the day, if you could sleep through the deafening AA guns, woke at dusk, and hunted in the dark. During that time, my radar screen was never clean. On the night of April 11th, the radar picket destroyer USS Kidd sent a desperate plea. "Flash, this is Pickett. If you don't get here now, we're feeding the fish. They're on us like locusts." My wingman and I went full throttle toward the coordinates. Through gaps in the clouds, I saw a scene I will never forget. On the ocean, a lone destroyer was being swarmed by 5 or 6 Japanese planes. The planes had their navigation lights on. They didn't care about being seen. They craved it. It was as if they were saying, "Look at me and die. Pick your targets. Fire on sight. Forget ID." I roared over the radio. My APS-6 locked onto a diving Val bomber. I had never flown so aggressively. The Hellcats' wings groaned under the G-force. I leveled out less than 500 feet above the water, firing almost point blank into the belly of the Japanese plane. 4 20-millimeter cannons, the later F-6F-5N mixed cannons with machine guns, instantly sheared the fuselage in two. It crashed into the sea less than 50 yards from the destroyer, the explosion illuminating the terrified faces of the sailors on deck. That night, we circled over the Kidd for 4 hours. We shot down 7 kamikazes trying to ram her. When I landed, my fuel gauge read 0. I caught the wire while coasting on fumes. Climbing out of the plane, my hands shook so hard I couldn't hold a cigarette. It wasn't fear. It was a physiological revulsion to pure madness. You were fighting an enemy that didn't want to live. It made you feel like a butcher, not a soldier. The nights of Okinawa were sleepless. As the campaign deepened, the Japanese realized the lethality of our night fighters. They started a new trick, taking off at twilight, flying low under the radar, and mixing in with our returning formations. We called them ghost followers, but the trick didn't work. By then, VFN-90, our redesignated unit, had evolved into its final form. We didn't just have better radar, we had developed a command system precise as surgery. Our scores skyrocketed. Major Harmer calculated that during the Okinawa campaign, the night fighter squadrons became the fleet's strongest shield. We cleared the skies of those pests, trying to sneak in under the cloak of night. One statistic was later written into history. Throughout the war, U.S. Navy carrier-based night fighter units achieved 579 aerial victories, while losing only 32 aircraft in combat, 18-1. It's a cold number, but only we knew what it meant. It meant that in the Pacific night sky of 1945, there were only 2 types of people, hunters and the dead. But I don't want to talk about glory. I want to talk about exhaustion. On the Enterprise, we fought continuously for 3 months, no rotation. Every night was takeoff, patrol, intercept, land, refuel, takeoff again. Our eyes were bloodshot from staring at green scopes. Many developed radar eye. Even when we closed our eyes, we saw dancing green blips. On May 14th, disaster struck. It was overcast with a low ceiling. A kamikaze pilot named Tomiyasu, flying a Zero loaded with explosives, used the clouds to cunningly evade the entire patrol net. I was in the ready room having my 5th cup of coffee that night. Suddenly, the alarm changed to that piercing, sustained wail, the signal for brace for impact. Before I could react, an earth-shattering boom shook the entire carrier. I was thrown from my chair, slamming hard into the bulkhead. The lights died. Emergency red lights flickered on. Smoke instantly filled the passageway. The plane had struck the forward elevator, punched through the flight deck, and exploded in the hangar bay. The Enterprise was grievously wounded, but the old girl had incredible toughness. Despite a massive hole in the deck and raging fires, damage control teams contained the situation within minutes. When I climbed up to the bridge, Gus was standing there, face covered in soot, looking at the smoking flight deck. "This is the end of the war, Vance." His voice was raspy. "They're out of moves. They can only use this way to express their despair. We've won. We just have to bleed a little more." Due to severe damage, the Enterprise was forced to withdraw for repairs. We were leaving the front, watching Okinawa fade into the distance, the night sky still lit by artillery. I felt no regret. I knew the VFN squadrons replacing us would continue to rule that darkness. Although the Enterprise went home, I didn't. Experienced night fighter pilots were a scarce resource. I was transferred to the USS Randolph, continuing suppression missions over the Japanese home islands. In July 1945, we began flying directly over Japan at night. It was a highly symbolic moment. 3 years ago on Guadalcanal, we were helpless against a single broken plane overhead. Now, we soared freely over their capital like it was our own backyard. My final mission was on a night in mid-August. The target was Atsugi Naval Air Base near Tokyo Bay. Our mission was an intruder patrol, a fancy name for shoot anything that moves. Visibility that night was perfect. I switched on the APS-6, and the coastline of Tokyo Bay laid out before me like a painting. But what I saw shocked me. Tokyo was burning. Not a localized fire, but the whole city seemed to be glowing. The B-29 bomber streams had just left, leaving devastation in their wake. The once mighty heart of the empire now looked like a pile of dying embers. My radar picked up a contact, fast, a fighter. "Could be a George, N1K. Watch yourself, ghost," my wingman warned. I adjusted course, but the Japanese plane made no aggressive move. He was flying level, aimless, like a wandering spirit. I closed in quietly. 500 yards. By the light of the fires below, I identified it as a Frank, Key 84. His landing gear wasn't even retracted, maybe damaged, maybe the pilot had just given up. I put my finger on the trigger, the gun sight ring circling his fuselage. At this range, at this angle, half a second of fire would turn him into debris. But I hesitated. Looking at the burning city below, looking at this enemy with no will to fight, I suddenly felt incredibly tired. The rage that fueled me on Guadalcanal, the thrill of the kill at Munda, it all evaporated in that moment. "Get lost," I whispered, releasing the trigger. "Go home and tell your emperor it's all over." I dipped my wing and swept past him. The Japanese pilot was clearly startled. His plane jerked violently, then made a clumsy right turn and fled. I watched him disappear into the darkness, feeling not a shred of regret. A short time later, on August 15, 1945, the long-awaited message came over the radio. Japan had surrendered. On the night the war ended, I sat on the deck for a long time. The fleet around me was ablaze with light. This time, no blackout orders. Thousands of navigation lights, searchlights, and signal lamps converged on the Pacific like a galaxy. I lit a cigarette, watching the spectacular scene, but my mind drifted back to that damp, moldy foxhole on Guadalcanal in 1942. I thought of old Joe. I thought of the nightly drone of Washing Machine Charlie. I thought of that bone-deep helplessness. In just 18 months, we had accomplished a miracle. We went from a bunch of blind men shivering in the dark to the most lethal predators on the ocean. With vacuum tubes, cathode ray screens, and those ugly but reliable radar domes, we completely rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. We were pioneers. VFN 75, VFN 101, VFN 90. These unit numbers might fade into history, but what we did forever changed the shape of war. People ask me, what did radar actually change? I tell them, radar didn't eliminate the darkness. It just stopped us from fearing it. It allowed us, in the pitch-black night, to know for certain what lay ahead and to control our own destiny. I stood up and flicked the cigarette butt into the sea. The tiny red spark traced an arc in the air before being swallowed by the waves below. I am Thomas Ghost Vance, former pilot of U.S. Navy Night Fighter Squadron 75. Tonight, the Pacific is quiet. I think I can finally get a good night's sleep.